goals. We set them at the top. We need our team to buy in. If I'm in a canoe and multiple people are rowing and one person's not pulling their weight because they don't believe they can, because they don't think they're strong enough, because they don't believe in the direction, that canoe's going in circles. We're going to talk about belief, mindset, and buying in next. Derek Neiding is next on Purpose Under Pressure. Well, welcome back. My name's Brian, and this is Purpose Under Pressure. It's a podcast about developing sales and leadership success on purpose and under pressure. It's brought to you by the professional sales and leadership training team at Sandler by the Ruby Group. You will find them in Akron and in Columbus, Ohio. They're in Jacksonville, Florida. They're also in Capital Region, New York. They do work across the country and for many international organizations as well. So it doesn't matter where they are. It's important that they can do work wherever you are. They do their work on purpose so that you and your team can represent that way, the way you want your team to represent you, to talk to other people, to build relationships. It shouldn't just happen nilly-willy and loosey-goosey. It should happen the way you want it to happen and the right way. And that's what Sandler by the Ruby Group can do. If you can find some time, it's worth your while to go ahead and reach out to them. You can find them online at therubygroup.sandler.com. The Ruby Group, practical sales and leadership coaching for high pressure moments. And that's what this show is all about. So let's go ahead and get cooking. If you run a business, if you run a sales team, whatever you do that drives an organization further, you likely have goals. At least you should. At least you better. They're your goals. They're your organization's goals. But are they everyone's goals? I've been in meetings before where the cram down from the top comes. We get our marching orders and away we go. And I've been one of those guys who says, yeah, that's never going to happen. That's a pipe dream. And that's not good. It's not good that I did it, and it's not good that it feels that way. And so I want to talk about that. Let's talk about buy-in, and let's do it with VP of Sales at Razorleaf Corporation, Derek Neiding. Derek, welcome to Purpose Under Pressure.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for having me.
I'm really glad you're here, and I'm excited for this topic because, like I said, I've been on that side where I didn't really know whether that was something that could be done. And if you don't think you can do it, you probably aren't going to do it. Before we get to there, though, can you tell me a little bit more about you, Derek, about Razorleaf? Let us know some context of what you're up to on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. So start with our company. So Razorleaf is the name of our company. We're a consulting and system integration firm, and so we do consulting work for manufacturing organizations, and we help them to design and build and support their products better. So there's a suite of tools out there, PLM, product lifecycle management, MES, manufacturing execution systems that people that design and build products use. And we help put those technologies in place. We help connect those technologies together. And so, when a company, when their product engineering is better connected with their manufacturing processes, you build a better product, things are smoother, you build things quicker, higher revenue, all of those sort of things. And so
when you get the processes right, you can get everything right.
That's right. Yep. That's right. So our company is about helping put those tools in place. Sometimes we step back and help them look at their processes to see if maybe there's some improvements they could make in their processes. Tools don't fix everything. Tools don't fix most things. Usually you have to look at the process as well. And so as an organization, we have 3 entities here in the U.S., and then we've got operations in the UK, in Northern and Southern Europe, as well as in India.
Wow. How'd you get involved in that, Derek? Your kids don't grow up and say, I want to do that for a living, and yet here you are.
So yes, that's great. So I worked at a large medical devices company. It was $1 billion organization. I worked in the design and engineering department, and I enjoyed it. I'm my background is in mechanical design, and so I enjoyed what I was doing. We happened to be implementing a PLM system and a new CAD system. And so I was always kind of the guy that liked to look at the tech and try to figure things out. I was a self-taught, database programmer. And so as we were implementing this system, I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of getting tired of the engineering thing anyway. This looks exciting. And so that's where I approached who happens to be the CEO of Razorleaf today and asked him for a job. That was at a different company. And he hired me at that company. We worked together for 2 years, and then he went and started Razorleaf, and I followed him here.
That's good. And I'm glad you did. And everything's going well for Razorleaf?
Everything is going well. As I said, we're growing. We've been in business for 26 years.
That's great.
So that's great. We have the same challenges that other companies tend to have, but in general, we're very proud of the company we've built, the culture we've built, the people that we have. I'm happy to say, like I said, I've been here. I was employee number one, but employee number two is still here. Employee number three is still here. I think employee number four is still here. We've got people that have
That's awesome.
16, 18, 20 years of tenure. So I think we're doing something right.
So the culture's there and the culture's working and people are wanting to work with you. And when they want to work with you, usually businesses want to do business with you. The culture just moves through the
That's right.
organizations and crosses lines that
Yeah.
way. So Derek, what is your role there? Vice President of Sales. What does that mean?
Yep.
What do you do there?
So I oversee the sales organization. So I have a team of account executives and technical salespeople that work underneath me, and so we're responsible for typical sales, uncovering opportunities, talking to existing clients, new prospects, and trying to figure out if there's a way that Razor Leaf can help, and we can line things up. In addition to just kind of the traditional day to day sales, it's incumbent on me to also make sure that we're selling the right stuff. So I have a good relationship with our thought leaders in our organization and the services side of the organization who tell me what they're hearing in the industry and what's changing and what's new. And I have to kind of boil that down to, is that something we can sell and how would we sell it? And to really try to help make sure that we're relevant. As I mentioned, we've been in business 26 years. Engineering isn't the same today as it was 26 years ago.
Nope,
So we have to
nothing
make sure
is.
that we're always trying to think about what the new technology is that we need to be able to help our clients with.
Yeah, so that you can move forward, and that's kind of what this program is about. It's purpose under pressure. It's the idea of doing more and doing better, and offering your services and growing. But it's on purpose and
Mhm.
it's under pressure. And one of the things that you and I talked about before was getting the organization, the sales team, the tech team, everybody that's trying to make things happen on the same page. So I'm interested in the pressures that come about for an organization like yours that's trying to grow. What are those pressures that come about in your pursuit of growth?
Yeah. So a lot of it is mindset. It's funny. As we've tried to grow over the 26 years, there have been cases where we hit our growth numbers and cases where we didn't. There have been cases where we hit some stagnation and we kind of wondered, are we going to get over this hump? And often, as I mentioned, I have an engineering background. Most of the people in our organization do. And so engineers tend to like to look at data and look at systems and that sort of thing. So a lot of times when we hit these rough spots, we always look for a tool to fix it. We should implement, the Rockefeller principles, or we read this book over here and that's going to be a great book. And if we have that meeting cadence, we'll be able to get over the hump. and
Mm-hmm.
and they are helpful,
Mm-hmm.
but at the end of the day, it's become very clear to us that if we don't have the right mindset, none of that matters. So I would say that's one of the biggest challenges that we have as we look at those goals is, do we believe in the goals? And when the goals aren't coming at the pace or the consistency that we had hoped, are we true to ourselves and do we stay on the goal? Or do we just throw our hands up and say, well, I guess that goal wasn't going to happen and we'll have to figure something else out? And so I think that's one of the biggest challenges is to try to have the mindset. It's a balance, right? Because you don't want a mindset that is unrealistic.
Right.
If I say I can become an NFL lineman tomorrow, that's just doesn't matter how much I believe it, it's
No.
not happening.
Yep.
But when the goal is possible, to keep your head in it, to keep the mindset, that's a challenge.
Yeah. So what are the different mindsets, the negative mindsets or the hurdle type of mindsets that you see? What in your experience, what have you seen in one or two or whatever people
Hmm.
that are really going to be harmful to the goals of the organization? And they're not trying to be bad folks.
Yep.
They just don't have the right mindset. What does that look like?
I think there's two things. I think the first is the we've never done it before mindset. So when you have an ambitious growth goal that maybe we've had good growth in the past, but never at this level, or we're trying to get into a new area, a new product, but we've never done that before. We can't do that, and that's and I understand the hesitation, but at the same time, if that's your attitude, it's going to be hard to execute and to do it.
Mhm.
And so that's something that I think as an organization that we really are trying to work on. We're trying to make sure that while we're pragmatic and while we're thoughtful and while we plan, that we still have the mindset that says just because we haven't done it before, it is achievable. Others in the world have done it. There's no reason that we can't do it. I think
Hmm.
that's one of the challenges.
Yeah, I
I think
agree.
another challenge is sometimes it manifests itself in lots of different areas, but it's really about, maybe kind of even goes back to that culture conversation, is it's really about how we deal with the challenges when they come up. So when I have a sales guy that works for me, or I have a coworker, or even a customer or prospect um, that things aren't going well, missed expectations, bad projects, those sort of things. How do we handle that? And I tend to be a very optimistic person. I tend to believe that most people are good at heart, and they're just trying. And so I think a challenge that we have to make sure we face is that when we have those hiccups in business or in dealings with people, that we step back and we look at the big picture, and we recognize that sometimes people are going through things, and that's why they're reacting that way. Sometimes it doesn't need to be a major event that stop the presses. We've got to figure out what's going on here. Sometimes it's a matter of just supporting our people and getting them through that. And I think that, coupled with having the right mindset, it allows you to kind of stay on task and stay focused. You're not all over the place and trying to deal with put out fires everywhere. You're really, really singularly focused in trying to move things forward.
I'm really interested in this topic, and I've got 15 questions going on in my head that I want to get to, but I think I want to dive a little bit further into what you normally do when you've seen this issue, when maybe a story of like, what can this do to you? I think that's probably the best way to start. When your team or different people on your team have a negative mindset and you've got goals to hit, what's the ramifications of that for a business leader when they identify it and they have to nip it in the bud or not or whatever? What's the bad that can happen when the mindset isn't right, and what do you do about it in your experience?
It's incredibly deflating.
For
It
who?
is. It is. I mean, again, I consider myself a very optimistic person. I
Yep.
always look for the good. But even when I'm on the call and one of my fellow leaders or coworkers is questioning what we're going for and if we can do it, it's hard. It's really, you start to question it. I mean, for
Yeah.
some reason, whatever the reason behind human nature is, we gravitate towards the negative, and the negative
And the
seems to,
easy.
right. When
Hmm.
when you have a headache and you go on Google to figure out what the problem is, it's never that you had too much sugar that day. It's always the worst thing possible, right?
Yeah,
So
that's
that
right.
seems to be where we gravitate. So when you hear those things and when you have those challenges, it's incredibly deflating, and it's incredibly infectious in a bad way.
That's the
Yeah, and because
it
other
bleeds
people
into
start to hear
everything.
that,
Yep.
they start to hear that and they start to wonder. And particularly when you have a leadership role, I mean, if leadership is telling you they doubt if this is possible, what are we doing? Why are we even trying? Is it really even possible? And so I think that it's incredibly caustic to an organization. Now, I'm not saying bury your head in the sand and ignore the facts. I mean, if we have a goal and we miss it in Q1 and we miss it in Q2, there's a good chance we may have to adjust that goal a little bit, or have some realistic conversations. So I'm not suggesting that you just bury your head in the sand, but I'm also suggesting that you have to be able to separate yourself from performance. And just because we've never done it before, just because we haven't started off on the foot we wanted to start off on, doesn't mean it's not possible. Again, others in our industry, our competitors, they've done it. We're,
Yeah.
they're not any smarter than we are. There's no reason we can't do it.
Yeah. I've led sales teams for many years, and the one thing that I know or can almost count on, and in fact, I resemble this compliment. Salespeople will choose the path of least resistance at all times,
Yep.
whatever, even if it's just a sale. Like if the guy's already nodding his head, I'm probably going to take the sale. I know that's probably not the right thing, but it's the easy thing to do. Or they sell the cheaper product because it's what the client wants, or
Discount too
whatever it might
much.
be, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's just human nature.
Yep.
When it comes to goals, for anyone to achieve a goal, you got to work harder. And
Mhm.
so you've got to do something different. You've got to want it more. And I'm wondering if the salesperson doesn't have the why, or anybody in your organization doesn't have the why in their minds of why this matters. Your top salesperson, you're probably not going to fire them if they come close.
Mhm.
And they can probably come close with their feet on the desk because they've done it all their lives. I mean, that can get, like you said, infectious. But how do you counter that? How do you get someone on your team to believe in something and to get them to work harder to do something never done? How do you change that mindset and that culture?
Looking at the typical salesperson, everything they do day in and day out, if we simplify all of that and really boil it down, they have two superpowers. First superpower that salespeople have is how they behave. Second superpower they have is what they say. As a seller, we only have two problems. We either said something or did something that we should not have said or done, or we didn't say something or do something that we should have said or done.
How do you get someone on your team to believe in something and to get them to work harder to do something never done? How do you change that mindset and that culture?
I think you have to get out of the me space. I have to understand myself, and I have to make sure my team understands why we're doing this. There's a reason Razor Leaf has
So important.
the growth goals we have, right? The reason isn't just because we want to make more money. I mean, that's obviously a nice benefit if we get to that point. But
Mhm.
we have people that are relying on us. I told our sales team at the beginning of the year, we've become a fairly large organization, even here in the U.S., the part that I'm responsible for, and there are people that left previous jobs to come and work here, and we owe it to them to make sure that this company is around for the long term and that the company continues to grow, that they have opportunities to grow within our company. So it's not about looking at a quota dashboard and saying I'm on target or I'm not on target. It's about we have to work hard to hit these numbers because there are people relying on us. The whole rest of the organization does nothing if sales doesn't do its job. And so it's incumbent on us to make sure that we're taking care of these people. These people have spouses, they have children, they left good jobs, they've given us a dozen or more years of their life. We owe it to them to do everything we can to try to be successful. And we're only successful if we're growing and if we're always increasing margin and being innovative.
Yeah. And when you miss the goal, you said there's times where you come short and things of that sort. When you miss the goal, how do you reset the conversation so that you can hit the goal next year? Most organizations, when they miss a goal, they don't clean the house out. They're still dealing with the same people and the same customers and the same product lines, and they're trying to innovate, but they didn't hit their numbers. How do you change that mindset if nothing changed? Almost like raising kids. If you don't hold people accountable, they're going to turn into knuckleheads, right? How
Yeah.
do you change that for the future after you've missed a little bit in the present?
Yeah, so I think that again, kind of the engineering mindset. We like to look at the numbers. We like to step back and look at and kind of ask ourselves, why did we miss it?
Yeah.
Oftentimes, while I'm not always a big fan of getting to the bottom of a matter, sometimes that kind of wastes time. You just need to get beyond the matter. But sometimes you do need to get to the bottom of the matter. And sometimes when you look into it, you find real reasons. We find that our goals in this particular area of our business really weren't realistic because we didn't do these marketing things or we didn't do these sort of things. We don't have the reputation or the name that we need. And so I think that's a good start, is to analyze the data, because sometimes it's not a matter of we don't know what we're doing. It's a matter of, oh no, we were actually doing some right things, but we just have to kind of tweak it here and there and do things a little bit differently. So I think that's important. I think the other thing that is important is to just be realistic and be willing to challenge yourself to do things that you've not done before. I mean, we are capable of doing these things. I, for myself, am a person that likes to take on new things. A few years ago, my son needed a car. He was turning 16. And I said, you know what? I can go out and buy a wrecked, totaled car and fix it up. I've never done a lick of body work in my life and never painted a car in my life.
Yeah.
But people do it. It can be done. So I reminded myself that I can figure this out. And it didn't turn out perfect the first time, but I learned something and it turned out pretty good the second time.
Yeah.
And so I try to remind the sales team that this is not, if we were inventing some, devices that had never existed before, maybe it's really a question of whether it can be done. We're not. These are things that can be done. We just have to have the mindset. We have to have the focus. And a lot of times looking at that data allows us to appreciate where we missed and where we need to adjust.
Now, this program is brought to our listeners by Sandler, by the Ruby Group. They've been partners with us for a long time, and I know you're familiar with them and have used them at times in different things. And I'm interested in their sales trainers and their leadership training. What tools of theirs have you used to help improve reaching the goals or the mindset of the individuals you work with? Are there ways that other people in your team that aren't necessarily sales driven, are they benefiting from some of this access? It's not a commercial for Sandler, but I'm just trying to find what are the tools perhaps that have helped you over time to actually overcome some of these challenges.
Yeah, there are, so just a little side story. When I went to my initial Sandler boot camp,
Oh, I love the boot camp.
right. So, and there's a funny story to how I got there. We didn't know what I signed up for. We thought it was something different. And so I ended up at the boot camp, and once I figured out what I was at, I was like, okay, they're going to give me sales training, right? How to do an email and how to do a follow up and what a proposal should look like and all that sort of stuff. And there's some of that, but it's mindset. It's attitude.
It is.
And I was shocked by that. And I was amazed at the same time because, the technique, you'll get there, right? The technique is, but if the mindset isn't there, just nothing works. And so that's something that I've tried to communicate to my fellow leaders on the leadership team, that whole mindset. I think of the behavior triangle, the behavior, attitude, technique, and how they all feed each other. And if you don't have the right attitude, then your technique is lacking, and because your technique is lacking, you don't, and so I've tried to share a lot of that with our team. I'm fortunate that the entire sales team has been trained on Sandler, and we love it. And so the rest of our organization hears a lot of those principles over and over again. But it was a surprise. It was a surprise to us because, again, bunch of engineers, everything comes back to technique. If you do something different, you get different results. And while that's true, if the head isn't in the right spot, it doesn't matter what you do, you're not going to get there.
Yeah. I remember when that conversation came up in that triangle, and they said, I think Mike was the one at the boot camp. He said, what comes first, belief or action? And I was the first one to raise my head. I said, it's gotta be belief. And he said, you're going to fail that way because you're going to believe it works, but you're not going to do the work. And he said, if you just, he said, you don't have to like it. You just have to do it. Mm-hmm. If you do the work and you believe that it'll be, it's all part of the circle, but it's got to start somewhere. And sometimes when you're having trouble believing, sometimes it's just dig in and do the work.
That's right.
Get the work done.
Yeah.
I'm interested, Derek, then in the future, because I know that this world for manufacturing and forecasting and trying to figure things out is just nuts. It's got to be impossible. And for goals to stick and for the why to stick, I imagine there's challenges on the horizon that you're going to have to overcome and maybe even switch the mindset a little bit along the way. What are some of those challenges that you see, and how do you anticipate getting over them to the success on the other side?
Right. So I think they could fall in a couple different buckets. There's certainly the technology challenges, right? So the industry that we're in is ever changing. AI has turned everything, upside down. A lot of what we do with PLM systems and MES systems is about data. And so when you have lots of data, AI loves lots of data, right? So we're always asking ourselves kind of how is AI going to have an impact on what we're doing? Are we going to have to shift in the sort of work that we do in order to stay relevant? And so that's a challenge. And that's something that we try to, be thought leaders on and to try to stay out in front of. Of course, the vendors that make the software that we put in, they have their idea. But we kind of play that intermediate role between the vendor and the customer, where we say, this is what the vendor's tool is, and here's how you use the tool. And so we have to really understand where things are going there. So I think that's one of the major challenges is just the technology. I think there's a challenge around our growth, which is about as we're trying to grow. Our growth goals are incredibly ambitious. We'd like to grow by 70% this year and be double in size in 2 years. And
wow,
yeah, they're massive goals. They're doable. The math works. I've done the math. The math works. We can do it. but they're big goals. But what that means is, and it's not always about volume, right? It's not, we don't sell a widget that if you want to double in size, you have to just sell 2 more widgets than you did before. That's not what we're providing services. And so a lot of the times these growth goals are going to cause us to get into bigger contracts, more strategic contracts with our customers. So now we have to be able to step up our game so that we're looked at and respected in a way that gets us into these sort of conversations in these contracts. And that's a challenge. The sales team has to take that challenge on to be able to present to our prospects and our clients what we can do. And then our execution team has to be able to take on that challenge to say, this isn't just about going and installing software anymore. We're going in and we're having conversations with C-level people about the future of their organization. And so that's something that mind has to be there. We try to, I believe we're a very humble organization. I believe everybody that works for us really tries to, we don't care if we're the smartest people in the room. Oftentimes we are, but we'll never tell anybody that we're the smartest people in the room.
You're the smartest person in this room, I'll tell you that.
but we sometimes forget that, and we sometimes don't remember that. And so I'll go to, on the sales side, we'll propose or sell something to a prospect or a client, and we'll go to the execution team, and they're like, we don't know how to do that. And I'm like, dude, you've been doing this for 15 years. Trust me, you know more than anybody out there. And it's hard to internalize that and to realize that, you know what, I do know something about this. I can do that.
Mm-hmm. And so I'm interested in probably the final question, but I've always thought, and I think it's true, it's easier to solve a problem before it happens, to get out in front of something than it is to fix something later. And so I'm interested in the double your business, the 70% growth, those kinds of numbers came somewhere, and then they needed to be communicated to the team. I'm interested in the efforts you took or the techniques you took to make sure that when you communicated those very large goals, those high expectations, I'm interested in what you did to make sure it was communicated well so that you generated buy-in instead of the opposite, disbelief. And I'm also interested in the reaction to the sales team and the team when they heard those goals based on the way you presented them.
Yeah. So the first thing that we did is I actually had the sales team go through an exercise. So I already knew what the number was going to be. Me and our CEO had talked about, or we knew the neighborhood the number was going to be in for 2026. And so towards the end of 2026, I had the sales team go through an exercise where I had them just think about their 26 pipeline. And, as a salesperson, particularly the kind of stuff that we do, which sometimes has a pretty long lead time, it's not a one call close sort of thing. It's sometimes many months. So I had them think about, what are the opportunities that you know about? Right? You've been talking to these people for 6 months. It's probably about to pop. What are those opportunities that you know about? And so I had them, create a spreadsheet and put all that information on there. And then, what are the opportunities you don't know about that you feel like if you have 20 conversations, you could get 1 or 2 of these deals and that sort of thing. So I had them go through and do that. The whole sales team did that individually. And then I wrapped all those numbers together. And you know what? Those numbers beat our goal.
Isn't that amazing? Yep.
And so then when it comes time for me to present the numbers to the team, and the team looks at that number and they're like, what did we do last year? And I tell them, they're doing the math in their head, and they're like, I'm like, but hold on, the math works.
These are your numbers. Love that.
And so that right there, I think I feel like the sales team's on board. I feel like the entire company wants to be on board. Some people are still working to get there, and I get it. I totally understand it. I feel like the sales team's on board because the sales team has seen the math. They know we can do it. We've seen companies that do the same thing that we do in the same industries that we do it in, and they're having growth that's very impressive. So again, bunch of engineers. Let's back it up with some data. That data proved that we can do it, and so why not?
Derek, I love that. It reminds me of one job that I had as a salesperson, and the owner described it to me as you have to throw the football where the receiver is going to be. You can't throw it where the receiver is.
Yeah.
And it's very safe to say, okay, there he is, throw it right to him. Mm-hmm. You just can't do that. And the only way you're going to do that is to know that the receiver is going to get there. Mm-hmm. And so if the sales team is the receiver, they have to get there because you already threw the ball. Right. You've already made your plans. Your tech people are already planning ahead. You're investing in different things. we've got to, as an organization, get together, and we can do this together. So that's one of the things that I'm glad you reminded me of, because that was a formational conversation that my boss had with me as a sales leader. Derek, if someone wanted to reach out to you, learn more about goal setting, learn more about belief, things of that sort. I know that a lot of sales leaders like to kind of banter together and learn from each other, and I imagine you wouldn't mind. Or if they wanted to learn more about Razor Leaf, I imagine there's some folks out there that are thinking, hey, that's something my company needs. How would they do that?
Yeah, so obviously you can get to us through razorleaf.com. I'm on LinkedIn, Derek Neiding on LinkedIn, and so you're welcome to message me on LinkedIn or reach out to me there. I love to have these kind of conversations, whether the conversations are about the technology that Razorleaf sells, or if it's about just kind of the leadership role that I take. I would be more than happy to entertain those conversations.
I think that's one thing that great sales leaders have in common. They don't mind sharing their successes and even their hurdles in trying to be successful with each other, because that's how we all grow. So, Derek, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for sharing this insight with our listeners here on Purpose Under Pressure.
Thanks for having me.
That's Vice President of Sales at Razor Leaf Corporation, Derek Neiding. Thank you, Derek, for joining us on the show. And folks, if you're out there and you're listening and you're watching, we do appreciate it. We do this multiple times every week. And if you are back, go ahead and subscribe. That way you won't miss another show. Tell a friend so that they can be on Purpose too. You'll find all past episodes of Purpose Under Pressure at brianmediastrategies.com/podcast and wherever you stream your favorite shows. The show is brought to you by the Ruby Group, practical sales and leadership coaching for high pressure moments. Until next time, no matter how high the pressure gets, stay on purpose.